Okay, we're back, my honest potters. Today's a good day for me personally because I get to introduce you to someone that has marked me in ways that she doesn't even fully understand. She does not fully understand. But besides the marking of me, the ways I've been drawn to actually know my body more, to do work within my own body, she is also just this incredible woman that helps other women, I think, just birth into their womanhood and what it means to be a woman. So who I'm talking about today is Dr. Christy Bauman. She's an MD, FT, and an LMHC. You can go figure out what all those things mean, but it just means she's hella smart and she's committed to helping women come into their true voice. She's an author and psychotherapist who focuses on the female body, sexuality, and theology. And you can go check out Christy's work at christybauman.com. You can also check her out on Instagram, and we'll put all the links, all the things to all the notes. But today we're going to talk about her new book called Her Rites. Christy, welcome to the podcast.
Friend, thank you for having me on the podcast.
I'm so excited. I hope you guys that are listening go and watch this on YouTube, because you just need to feel and see the essence of who this woman is with her little red glasses on and everything. She's a good woman. But Christy, here's the deal. I was sitting in the Starbucks parking lot this morning where I do all things holy and sacred in my car. Just that's where I do things. And I was like, I know I'm going to interview you today. And I knew I know so much. I have experienced so much of you in person from some story work weekends that we've done together. And honestly, a Korean spa. We can get into that later because that is a whole thing. But I was like, I better read this book. I need to look at some of these things in this book because I'm going to interview on this book. And I start reading, Christy, and I cannot put this book down. I am weeping. I am highlighting. I am just undone by what language this is bringing to me of what it means to be a woman and to give language to the different seasons of being a woman. It's just unbelievable. So I'm talking about your book, Her Rites. And what I'd love to hear from you is just, first of all, like an overview and a why behind why you wrote this book. And then I'd love to get into like the nuances of it and like the meat of it.
I mean, geez Louise, who doesn't want to be introduced like that? I listened to your voice memo and I started tearing up. Like, I was like, okay, I'm going to just keep this voice memo. Keep forever, please. Like, they didn't have that option. It's like, keep. And I'm like, forever, please, eternally put in my mind when I get sad and I'm in the shower crying and I think there's no hope. To Karrie's voice memo.
Amen.
It was so sweet to hear you say that. And I just think, why did I write it? I wrote it because I've been sitting across a seat in a couch in a counseling room week after week, woman after woman for the last 15 years. And there's a sense of where I am transitioning out of that role in my life. And there felt like the Spirit just said, you've heard enough. Now it's time to share it. And it felt like accountability to the 15 years of women and to tell the themes I've seen and the roadmap through possibly what I would call a year of therapy with me. And so even though there's not the possibility of doing therapy with me in that same manner, this is a way that this could be to the masses of good woman. If you want to go through every step of your story, let's break it down to these rites of passage. Let's start with birthright. Let's get to legacy, and let's let you belong to yourself and let the world, I want women to die free. And so if that's the case, we have to get back into this body that we've been given. And so this was my attempt to do it.
Oh, it's just a stunning piece of work. And, when you say kind of this rite of passage, RITE, her rites, can you just define a little bit more what you mean by that? Like our right to birth, our right to be birthed, our right, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. And rite of passage obviously is been something that has historically been a part of every culture, right? This is thing we know about conceptually. And then in the Western culture, we're like, well, what are our rites of passage anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on maybe what culture we come from or what family we're a part of or what traditions we still hold to. But a rite of passage is just that. It is a journey from one end to the next. And we either go through, 100 of those in one day, or we go through one of them in a lifetime, right? And where I start is with birthright, because I'm talking about the passage of you going through the birth canal and taking your first breath,
Mm.
and what that means. And then I, at the end, finish with what is your last breath going to be like?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you want to take your last breath? We did not have control over how we took our first breath, but we can have a say into the integrity that we're going to have when we leave this world, even if we don't know when that is. So accompaniment through those rites of passage. And that's that idea, is what's the journey?
Mm.
What's the journey you're on today in this moment? And what's the journey you're on in this year? What's this season for you? And how are you coming to it with intention?
Mm.
And where are you finding yourself alone in it? Where do you need to ask for a friend? Where do you need to mark it? Where do you need to tell story around it? All the things.
Yeah. The name of this whole series that I'm doing, interviewing some women. I don't do a ton of interviews. But the series just came to me like Bold Women, Bruised Hearts.
Mm.
And as I'm reading this, my curiosity to write at the depth of what you have written, which this is a vulnerable read. There are things in it that you are kind of filleting open for us, your story. In an essence, I felt like you were doing a rite of passage and birthing so we could all walk through like I'll go first, friend. I'll tell you the way. I'll show you the way. There's such a pilgrimage in it. As I was reading it, I'm like, you're going first so that I can have language for what I'm experiencing that I don't know how to put language to. But could you tell me a little bit about what what made you want to write something? Because it's not just like life has been great, and so I'm going to write this thing about rite of passage. Like it feels very like this is all the pain, and so let me put it in a way where I can help you passage through the pain but see the gift within it. And so I'm curious for you, what motivates someone personally to write some? Yes, you want them to die free, and yes, you want them to experience, and yes, you've heard the stories from other women, but what about you, like your personhood that said, if I die, I need this to be out there for me? And how would you, what would you say to that?
Yeah. I mean, this in your entire calling is to help people tell story, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's to help people because our stories matter and they reflect a part of the image of God in us, of the Imago Dei that is not like anybody else. And so I believe that every person has a story and we contribute to each other and we need each
Mm-hmm.
other. And so what I'm realizing is that I'm not getting enough by just telling an overview. Like I'm having to dive deep, and the deeper we dive into story, the deeper the healing is. And so
Yes.
for me, it's a deep dive. I'm like, oh gosh, I know this is scary. I'm not going to ask you to go as far as I haven't gone myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it does become a rite of salvation for me. It becomes a salvific journey of,
Mm-hmm.
can I get saved if I dive just deep enough into telling the story? Like, God, where are you in this? And
Mm-hmm.
that was my attempt, is that's how deep I needed to dive in my womanhood, in my identity, in my own story, to say, where are you? And what does this all mean? And does it matter? And I'm still like coming out with shaking hands. Like,
Mm-hmm.
still sort of like, maybe guys don't do it. Like, just read about it. I'm not sure. Like, there's some things that I read when I was recording the audio, and I thought, why did I put this in here? I have no idea if is, oh my gosh. Like, and so thank God it's already written and it's contracted, because I can't go back. But there's a sense of, and the first story I start with is literally outed in my nakedness. And that's what it feels like is, God, you made us naked in the beginning. Is that good or not? And, and just, but I want to live that honestly. And
Yes.
that's to me the only type of relationship I really want to be in, because this world is hard to live in.
Yes. That I think that's a word that's a great word that comes to mind is what I feel we're invited into is into purity. And let me explain that because I don't mean sexual purity. I mean purity in the essence of vulnerability, of what it actually meant to be naked in the garden and not feel shame. That there is a when like everything you talk about, which I want to get into some of the details of that, but each one of these passages, the initiation, the exile, the legacy, all these things are bringing us into a form of kind of the unzipping, the nakedness of what does it mean to be human, and especially for this book, what does it mean to be woman, and the graphicness of what it means to be a woman in a way that just feels so yeah, calling us back to our purity. And there's something even in some of the words that you say, I'm like, man, like this is what my body feels, but there's also, is there permission to be this? And I think the question that I want to ask is, why do you think, and you know, we're just here on this planet trying to figure it out, but like, why do you think we, especially as American culture, have moved away from really, and especially Christian culture, especially when the culture of Christianity should be so embodied, right? Like this is what we should be. Jesus was so embodied, but we've moved away from it without the historical context of some of these things that I do understand. But what do you kind of find as you stand here on American soil and you're watching as the world is kind of being shaped by so much, you know, of Christian culture and whatnot? Why do you think that this is such a hard concept for us to move into our rites of passage and even our womanhood and this forms of purity? What are your thoughts on that?
Right. Because vulnerability and nakedness is so exposing. And
Mm-hmm.
you are taught to have a defense, right? Like, even when I think about our culture, I don't think it's like a safe place to walk around without a defense up. It feels like the smart thing to do is not to leave the house without, all the gear you need to survive. And
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like a Garden of Eden in any sense of the word these days, like these days for me. So I do think, it's scary to be vulnerable. It is really
Mhm.
scary. And you know what? If we, when we get an arrow in our back,
Mhm.
and particularly for women, if we get an arrow in our back from another woman, or a pastor, or as someone who's supposed to be safe,
Our mother.
mother, the places you think would never turn on you, or shouldn't, it messes with your mind so much. And maybe you can even pull that arrow out, but that wound and that scar tissue that comes around it, man, that becomes sacred and holy ground to let somebody again touch it, even if it's healed, even if you have no feeling there anymore. Someone touches that place or anoints it, or like, that's some of the most intimate places, and you immediately are allowing someone to do it again.
Mm.
That's that's a really exhausting world to live in.
Mhm.
And I hate that feels like where our culture's gone, is that we are afraid. We're afraid of what's going to be taken from us, or we're afraid to be vulnerable because the cost is very high, and we've been vulnerable at some point, and there's been some rupture, some wound, and we've probably had to sew ourselves back up. And we made a vow pretty quickly then we weren't going to let anyone else touch that space. But it is really lonely. And I don't want to I don't want to live there. Like that's really scary. I don't want to live thinking everyone is like that. I'd rather go out there and find the people who aren't like that and have a tribe try again. It's just not the world I want to live in.
Yeah, and yet I have this sense, and I think probably why I relate so much, and I have questions about this, but why I relate so much to the rite of exile. It's just a portion of your book, and I want to go through each one and just have you just give a thing about it. But I think the reason why I actually flipped through everything and went to that one first before I even read anything, it just felt like, oh, I know that word. Tell me more about it. And like there was something about me, and even meeting you and meeting, Kathy and Heather Stringer, Kathy Lorzell, which people know Kathy from the podcast, but that invited me and gave me permission of like, hey, I know you've left the kingdom that you have been living in. And I felt, it'll make me cry, but I felt like I'm wandering in this desert filled with immense grief and loneliness, and also this weird sense of hope in my belly that something has to be better than what is. And it drew me out of the kingdom and into this desert. And I have wandered, and I've met people along the way, but I have wandered looking for other faces that will say, I we welcome you. And like in a way there's like a beckoning to, what you talk about, and I know Tracy Johnson talked like this red tent kind of living, like, hey, come into this space and let's begin this initiation process and this process of what it means to actually step into who you were created to be. And I write about that in the form of story, but you write about it in the form of practice, like an actual marked moment. And I thought about our history. I was telling my husband about this. I got an earful after reading your book. And I was like, we're going to do this and this. And everybody's going to bury something. I'm all in. And he's like, are we hugging trees today? Are we taking our shoes off and feeling our feet in the ground? What are we doing today? Because I'm just all in with all of this stuff. But I just thought, man, we mark moments so arbitrarily, like, birthdays and funerals and the Eucharist. And, we are a people that are drawn to rites of passage, ritual that mark us, but without any thought to it. And man, when you have intention for something, it changes it. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So tell me about
But that
what I want. Go ahead.
right? That costs the body so much to slow down, because when you slow down into it, all the memories of all the stories that didn't go well come up to the surface, right? And so it's just like, I mean, even going back to when you're saying being in the desert and seeing a face, like you recognize something. And I think what
Yes.
we recognize is a mutuality of, wait, you've known death. You've buried before, haven't you? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I trust hands that have buried before.
Oh.
And it's because I've had to bury things that I didn't want to, and I didn't maybe know how to, and I had to do it maybe by myself because I didn't have a mother who knew how to teach me that, or would, had turned her face, or I didn't have leadership in the church who knew how to talk about that or traverse those grounds. And so I think we recognize, when we really slow down and stop, we recognize a kindred spirit. And sometimes when you've been in the desert that long and there's not been water, and you find somebody who actually says, like, I actually have enough water to share here. Would you like to drink? There's something in us that we just haven't met people who have enough water to share.
Yes.
And it feels
Oh.
really good. It feels communal. It feels like the Eucharist. It feels
Yes.
like it. And it's not weekly. It doesn't happen that often. And that's why I think our bodies sometimes can't keep up with ritualizing things so often, because the cost to actually slow down to something is costly. And to take in the other's face and to take in the other's body and to imagine what they've seen and what they've lived through and what they've survived since you last saw them, or since if you never even knew them, right? Like it was something
Mhm.
of meeting you and even being with you in the water, in the
Mhm.
of like not even knowing you, but your body was telling me that it knew things and had survived things that I could imagine, but it was a felt shared experience, and it felt less lonely. And sometimes that's the only gift we have in crucifixion, is the lack of loneliness in that.
Mm. Yeah, well, I'm undone right now. I'm just bawling my eyes out over here, like, "Don't keep it together, keep it together." There is something about that, and yet I guess my thought is, and you can speak to this because it is so costly. And in the back of my mind, I mean, what Christy's talking about is she invited me and Kathy into this Korean spot. And I'll be very honest with you. Like, I was like, what the hell? Because you got to be naked in this place. Everyone's naked in this place. It's kind of wild. I've never met Christy before, really. I mean, I'd known her from the weekend, but I think what you're saying is so true, that there's a knowing that, one, it felt like God was actually speaking, like, hey, I've actually brought these two women to be a part of something that even in this few moment is going to heal something in you that has been really damaged in what it's meant to be naked, to be with another woman and not feel harm. And I think when you say it's really costly to the body, it is. It's so costly, but I guess on my end I feel like, but exile has been far more, like, I'd rather dare and risk what it meant to go into those waters with you and Kathy,
Mm.
than stay on the edge and watch it happen. Like, I couldn't bear the weight of that, and the cost that it has been for me to not try again, to not get in the water again with two other women, even though I have so much data that says when you are this vulnerable, you are going to be too much. You are going to be kicked out of the tent. You're going to be sent to wandering again. And I guess, like, that's my question for those people that are listening, where they're like, okay, and I know they're still kind of like, what are we actually talking about here? Because there's just so, like, a lot of this is whatever, the theoretical or whatever. But when women are sitting here and they're listening to this, and there's something in the knowing of, my soul is longing for a face to see me, and yet will I choose to risk? What would you say to those that are sitting here listening, going, yeah, I have had so many arrows, I have had so much, and it has been too costly. Why would I choose to risk again? Why would I choose to do that?
And now we're in the rite of intuition, which is when your intuition has been silenced or chaotic and you don't know what to trust anymore. I think that is the worst wounding we can do to women. When women cannot trust their own inclination, like, I think that's right, I don't know if that's right. So to me, that's where there has been some sense of harm or abuse that's happened.
Mhm.
And my hope is that every woman would have that back in herself. And to the listener, you either feel something or you don't, and your body's either ready or it's not. And this is
Mm.
about kindness. It's not about demand.
Right.
We have lived in a world where we've been demanded to believe things, to do things, to forgive, to get over, to try it again. That is actually not the spirit I'm talking about.
Mm.
What I'm talking about is trusting your body to say to you, I am ready, I'm not ready. That sounds good, maybe next year. That sounds like I should try it tomorrow. That sounds like I don't know if I need to grieve that I'll never get there again. But if you at least can know what you feel towards what you and I are talking about, that is okay. When there's this sense of like, yeah, just the knowing. To me, if a woman can belong to herself, that is my goal. that is, to me, we're talking about rites of passage, but I think the first rite is belonging to herself, where she knows what she knows.
Mhm.
And that is intuition. You come out of exile and you've had to listen to all the voices, all the accusing voices, everything. And then it gets quiet enough. Exile gets quiet enough. And then you know what you know. And you know it so strongly. Now you go back into the world and it's a different story of who you're in relationship with, whether or not you can actually act on that knowing self. But all I'm saying is here, there's no demand. It's just telling the person, do you hear something that something inside of you says, I'm really thirsty for the water they're talking about?
Mhm.
And if you are, like, then maybe listen a little bit longer. Maybe seek something more that we're talking about or we're offering. And if it's not, it's okay. It's okay. We bless you to just walk by. We don't need you to need it. It's only the people who need it. That's okay. I'm just saying it. I'm literally filleting myself in this book for the people who are out there like me and needed to know they weren't alone.
So good. So how do we begin to, if the first step is like really knowing myself and belonging to myself, how do they begin doing that?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's story work. I think that's where
Mhm.
that's where you live. That's where Kathy lives. Like that's,
Yes.
that stuff is when we know our story and we tell our story. And her rights is just a template helping you move from story work to body work.
Yes.
It is just, it's just kind of this continuum, and it
Mhm.
invites you of like, hey, I'm going to tell you my story in these silos of rites of passage. This is where I've had clients tell their stories. This is where I've known these pivotal moments that have
Mhm.
impacted me in some way, and my body was waking up, and I maybe learned how to do story work around it, but I didn't know how to bring my body into the story. Because usually your body's harmed in the story, so it shuts
Right.
down. And then you go up here and you figure out what happened. But then it's that next step of, okay, now how do I take movement? How do I touch the places that have been marked? And
Mhm.
where's their reclamation of that?
Oh, it's so good. And I think there's something that I've discovered over the course of the years of doing story work, that Jesus was very clear about mind, body, and spirit. And I think we start in our mind, right? We start intellectualizing things. There's a context that we need to have. And story work, although it is an embodied experience because you're sharing the story, again, what you said and what I have experienced is I was not ready to unlock my body until I really had a more framework and context of the terrain that I was walking in, because I didn't even have context for the terrain. And so I've watched this and I've watched this in the life of Jesus, that he models this kind of, let me tell you about who I am. And then he moves you into kind of this heart connection, and let me, share my heart with you. And then as he's getting ready to leave, he's like, now let me share my body with you. And it's such an invitation into, I want you to actually eat my body. What a radical thing. It's just wild. And yet he knows how we're wired. He knows who we are. He appealed to the disciples in their knowledge, the terrain, the rewiring of how they saw religious goods and services,
Mhm.
and move them into heart connection of letting them know I'm here with you. And then he moved them into their bodies. I want you to eat my body and drink my blood, meaning I want you to fully experience what it means to ingest all that you've had and experienced with me, and let it become you. Let it become what now we would call full integration, which you talk about in your book, and shalom and peace, and the fullness. And so I love that what you've explained in your book is, what I so passionately write about is kind of more of the introductory into, here's your story and here's your terrain. Where I have been locked up was knowing I've done all of this work. And I mean, I have done a crap ton of work. And I still found myself going, well, why am I still, I know what my dad did. I know my relationship with my mother. I know who God is. And I've wept. I have grieved. But there was a marked moment in what I've been invited into over this past 2 years of now it was time for my body to join in. And I feel like your book is the invitation for the body to join in what the mind and the heart have begun to realize and know. And now there's this moment where our body can join in. So I would love to hear just briefly on, I want to go through each one of these rites. Just tell me briefly what they can experience. So first is the rite of birth.
Mhm.
What's the thought and the rite behind this?
Yes. So that's the idea that if you did grow up Christian and you read the Bible, you would assume, or even Greek mythology historically, in most myths, the firstborn son is who inherits. He has the birthright, and so whether
Mm,
there's a story about trading birthrights, it's still among the males. It wasn't ever extended to the females, right? We have
that's
a
right.
lot of stories about the female trying to know where her place is in inheritance of a birthright when it's passed down through the
Mm,
masculine. So that's where I start. And what I talk about is that each person, what we know is each person, when they take their first breath, it is their birthright. And for the female, it's her voice. When that cry out is your
mm,
birthright, that you are alive. That's when you legally have a voice. That's when you have, if we'd say legally, it's whenever you have the right to vote, or whenever whatever it is, there's a legal sense that you have a birthright to speak. And
mhm,
that's our voice. So birthright is starting of, what does it mean to take your birthright? What was your birthright? And I go into a ton of detail around that, but that's the
yeah.
synopsis of it. And then rite of initiation would be the next one.
Mhm,
And it's when we go from naive to knowing. And that is anytime it's something that we didn't know, and then all of a sudden we have an experience and now we know. Either our body leads us through that, either we have an epiphany of mind where we just understand something, but before we were unaware of it and unknowing, and then we came to a place of knowing. So rite of initiation can happen again and again. It can be a first kiss, and now we know what it is like to be kissed. It can also be me jumping off of a cliff at 42 years old, when I've never done that before, and feeling my body at that weight and size and time and space, jumping off and fearing my life and plunging into the water. That is also initiation for me, right? So rite of initiation, naive to knowing.
I want to pause there for a minute because this is a thing when we talk about women, and this is something, and I don't know why this brings me to tears, but you will probably tell me why. But my daughter, so my daughter's 13, and there was something in me that knew this, before I read your book, before I met you. And I've always been this mom. Like, we even did birthday parties for my kids, all three of my kids at 5 years old. They got to have a gum party because they weren't allowed to have gum until they were 5. So they all got to have a gum party, and everything was filled with gums, and they got to pick their favorite piece of gum. And I just knew something about, well, this is a marked moment for you that you get to have gum. And I know that sounds silly, but I have always done these things around, like, my daughter. She couldn't have her ears pierced until she was 10. And it wasn't like I was trying to, I wanted her to know that there's something about you marking your body that allows you to enter into adorning your body with jewels and saying, like, as a double digits, I am moving into having a little more autonomy around what I want my body to look like. And so she had a big piercing party. And, and there's been, like, my son is graduating this year, and every man that I know is coming into our home and will be offering something that represents manhood to them, to move my son into what it means to be a man. But this is just kind of instinctually. So my story here is around my daughter. My daughter, I only have one daughter, and I didn't have a mom that, my mom had eating disorder, committed suicide, and there's a lot there. But I remember when I started my period. And I remember the day I started, and I I kept putting my underwear in the hamper because I thought I kept pooping my pants. And I'm like, why do I keep pooping my pants today? Like, what's wrong with me? Diarrhea? What's happening? Right. And my mom comes up to me and she's like, why do you keep putting your underwear in the thing? And I was like, Mom, I keep pooping my pants. And she was like, oh, honey, you've become a woman today. And I was like, what? Like, what does that mean? And you've started your period and here it is. And then I remember my sister crying, going, I don't want her to be a woman. And I kind of was like, oh, okay, knew about a period, but I didn't. Anyway, that's all I had. And I just remember thinking, this is too monumental to just be thinking I'm pooping my pants and it casually be told that I'm this woman. So I took my daughter away for a weekend and I had every woman that I know write a letter, and I had bowls. These bowls, I actually called Heather Stringer because I was like, hey, help me. These are the kind of the rituals I want to do. But Heather's so good at rituals. She's just phenomenal. And I was like, this is the ideas I have. And she was so gracious because she's like, Karrie, you already have it in you, which was, coming from her, you're like, oh, amazing. My point being is that each bowl represented something of her childhood, something we had, like we made flower lays for her head, like flower crowns. And I prayed over her. She stepped over these roses and then one of them was a bowl of all of these, sanitary napkins and these different things. And it ended with this jewel that she had. And so this moment that felt like I knew something needed to be marked.
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about this rite of initiation, I feel like this idea around our menstruation and our, you talk about, we know life and death every month. We know something of life and death every month. Very long story to say, why do you think it is so important to mark something like that? Like that moment, even for my daughter, who's not even started her period yet, but she's now, I think, excited. I don't know, but is knowing. And there is anointing on her. Why is this so important, do you feel?
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's literally why I wrote an entire book called Theology of the Womb on the importance of this, right? It's because we, particularly women, we don't know how to engage our bleeding body in the story of God. We don't understand it. We're told in a sense that it's a curse. We're pooping in our pants. Like, we don't know that there's something sweet and important about it. And yet, when we were talking about Eucharist earlier, that we have Jesus breaking his body open and pouring out his blood that we would drink it. Right. To me, the masculine connects with the eating of his body. There's violence. There's the cross. There is like the beating. I think men understand it from a bodily sense and the external part of that. And I think for women, there's something about, we know what it is to break our body open and to bleed. And we know what, monthly to bleed and what it cost us. And so we're feeling that story of being broken open on behalf of something, but it's never taught to us that, oh, this is something beautiful, because this is you're going to gift by your body bleeding again and again. And the practice of this, like, you bring something to the world that is of Christ, of just something deeper, of a sense of cyclical growth of what comes from death. When you have to bury something and you're heartbroken, and then spring finally comes and something comes out of that ground again that you never thought was going to grow out of that ground. Baby girl, that's what your body represents when it goes through the cycles of bleeding. You're not just pooping your pants. Like, that is the horrific sadness, is that we haven't known how to translate that, or we weren't taught. We may have even felt it. Like, if we can get past our shame, we might have felt our power, but I don't know that we did. Right. And so to think about how beautiful for your daughter to be invited into this, all means something. Like, I mean, I'm going back to the gum. Like, we're celebrating the fact that you get to do something now. And she's going to go into her bleeding so differently than you did. And thank God.
Thank God. Thank God.
It's actually like, pretty incredible. Easter just passing, our kids, we have this, they want to watch The Chosen, and we always like pick our little favorite scenes on The Chosen and watch. But,
Mhm.
at one point, they were talking about the sword in Jesus' side on the cross and how blood and water ran. And that's how they knew death was here. And
Mm.
literally, my daughter like turns to me and she's like, Mom, that's what's going to happen, right? In my body. Like, I'm going to bleed. And there's
Mhm.
the connection of that she could connect that to the cross.
Wow.
Like, okay, this is the story we need to be telling, right?
Mm.
Not just to cover it up or that we need to clean it up or move past it. It's that there's something here that's really powerful, and it leads to resurrection. It
Mm.
leads to rebirth.
Right. It leads to life. Well, and blood and water is when we birth a baby. It's blood and water, it's blood and fluid. It was just such a reading that I was like, man, I think if we actually can pause, I think there is a natural desire to mark moments
Mm.
just intuitively. I just don't I just think we are intuitive creatures that want to, I even think about like my dog who like buries a bone and like is doing it out of like, I want to savor this. This is a moment. Like it's something in the rhythm of how God created all things is, the seasons are marked, they're rhythmic and so there's just something about the rhythms
Mhm.
of the earth that give us rhythms to our bodies, like let us know like, hey, this is what makes us alive, this is what makes us who we are. And I love your juxtaposition here between how men understand the battering of the body as a sense of holiness, like there is a sense of holiness in that, and like, hey, what my hands can do and what my body can take on, and what
Right.
the strength of me. And yet we're fragile on the outside. Like you punch us and we're like, ow, like that's hard. I mean, some of us are tougher, but you put us in a labor room and, and we can tear it up, like I am pushing a human out of my body. And so like there is something, and I love that you talk about how God is both mother and father, and the scripture is very clear about this. And I'm not trying to get, some of you can trip out on this, but God is not gendered, and yet he holds both of these places. And I just, this part of initiation was just such a, I don't know. It just felt very affirming, I think, to what my body knew, what has known to do in my parenting, because has so not been true. Okay, so then this moves us into rite of exile.
I mean, it's the
Tell
one
me a little bit about rite of
I
exile.
least like. And if I was going to get all, Enneagram on people, I would say at some point we choose one of these rights, and I think we like to live in them. Or, there's one that you'll probably read and you're
Yes.
like, this is the one I like the least. This is the one I feel most comfortable in. And it's probably story based, right?
Mm,
And I think in 10 years, I might have more research around it. But for me, exile is the one that I'm like, hell no, please, I'll pass. I'll take,
no, thank you.
I'll do all the other ones twice, but please don't make me do this one. And so I say that to
Right.
say that exile also begins with all the voices that we don't want to hear, all the accusing voices, all the voices of darkness or of evil. And then we know that we are done with the rite of exile
Mm,
when we see the gift of it. And the gift of it is that it's quiet enough for us to hear our knowing voice.
mm,
What is most true? What God and I know in alignment
yes.
is the most true thing. Um, and so that is
Mm.
my summation of exile.
Yes. I love what you say on page 97. You said, this is what exile feels like. No one understands what you're experiencing, but exile cannot be done with another, not even your partner. I knew my husband loved me, so I wondered why he wouldn't turn the van around. You're talking about when you had to leave Seattle and go into this newfound town and city and state, why he wouldn't turn the van around knowing how sad I felt. Why wouldn't he rescue me? This is a common question for for even our creator during one's rite of exile. Why won't you rescue me, God? I think so much of the questions lie in the why in exile. It's the part of the fruit of the spirit of just long suffering, of what it means to suffer long. And yet it's doing something in us. And what you say, I love the very end, and you just said it right there, is that, exile is over when you understand the gift of it. And this is where I think most people stop. They refuse to let their heart, even if they are in exile, they refuse to let their heart feel it and experience it. And therefore they stay in it. They like, they're stuck in this constant state of like, I'm lonely, I'm alone, like there's no one for me, like God is against me, because it's almost in a way like you have to, it's like birthing, right? You have to give over to it. Like, I have to give over to exile. It's where I'm at, it's what is true. But just like you were talking about in the book, where you are just sobbing, driving many miles from Seattle to where you live now, and there's a giving over to it. And the moment that this is a long part of the story, you guys got to, all this to say, you got to get the book. But the moment when this is where I started weeping, is where the school shootings had happened, and you'd taken your kids to school, and you were really worried, and you're like, I don't have my friends from Seattle, like I don't have anybody. They have this one friend that might get me. And this choice that you chose to reach out and go to her house, and she prayed with you. And I'm like, man, that was the moment where, from what I read and how it touched me, was your moment where you were like, I actually can invite someone into this now. Like I'm in this space still, like I still feel the remnants of it, but I'm moving out of it, because I'm able to actually invite someone into it.
I can tell that
so
exile because you named that so well. That's exactly what was happening. Exactly.
Oh, it was so beautiful the way I told you, I'm just sobbing reading that portion, because I think, and I do have I'm going to come around to a question to all of these that you've kind of already named, but I want to move on. Rite of creating. Tell me about the rite of creating. Love that.
My last book, Theology of the Womb, is literally around the uterus, the cycle of the uterus, bleeding, a bleeding God. And it's all through my pregnancies, miscarriages, stillbirth, actual healthy pregnancies, viable pregnancies. And I got a lot of questions from women saying, well, what if I haven't had a baby? What if I'm infertile? What if I have had a hysterectomy? What if I don't want children? What does that mean? Like, where does that play out? So I was really particular in this book that the rite of creation, to take a higher idea of the story, and that it's not just in having a baby, right? And so I go with the sense, womanist theology is Black women's story about the study of God, and they tell the story through their body. So they tell the story that they did not, they didn't own land, right? They didn't have scrapbooks to pass down to generations to tell about what they did. So story cloths became the way in which you knew something. The history was in the story, that was in the clothes passed down, the tablecloth passed down, the afghan passed down, the blanket, whatever. That was the way we gave our story generation to generation maternally prior. And so the idea that the rite of creation is, yes, women can create corporations, they can write books, they can write musicals, they can make movies, they can do whatever they want. But there's something in the creating that we look in the weaving. And what I love about the image that my artist and I tried to convey in the image, is she's weaving her hair into her story cloth. And it's talking about in the scripture that it's our glory, right, is in our hair. And so she's weaving it into this cloth, into this story cloth. And I love that idea that a story cloth is carrying your story. What's an article that you have that tells a story about your life? And that's what women do. They get to be a part of that. And so there's just many stories, whether it's the cloth that we knew to put around Jesus's body, that the women knew how to wrap his body and prepare it in the tomb, whether it is a cloth that's passed down. And I tell a story of a woman in a plantation in South Carolina who has to give up her daughter, is forced to in slavery. And so she stays up all night weaving inside of a satchel to her daughter who she is, who her daughter's name is, who her mother is, who her grandmother is. And then she gives her pecans and a dress and a cut of her hair in the satchel. And she sends her daughter, and she never sees her daughter again. But that's what she gives her daughter, is this story cloth. This is who you are. And if I never see you again, I want you to at least know where you come from and who I am. And so just the rite of creation is that we have the power to tell a story in what we weave, in how we set a table, and then how we nourish, what we cook at a table, a recipe that we pass down, the map of what we make and how we nourish people. So that's the rite of creation, is what are you creating? How do you set a table? How do you set up space? How do you bring people to your table? What do you cook for them? How do you clothe them? How do you wrap something around them? How do you clothe yourself? How do you clothe your children? How do you clothe your family? That all comes from that Proverbs 31, that understanding of a woman knows how, in a sense, to weave. And thinking again, weaving on a much bigger understanding of weaving.
Right. Oh, it's just so good. So good. Which then leads to kind of what you've addressed earlier, this rite of intuition.
I
Right
love.
of intuition.
I actually don't know if we talked about it yet, but along with the artwork, wrote an album with and so we wrote 6 songs.
I know, this
one
is so
for
cool.
each rite of passage. It's available Amazon Music, anywhere. It's just called Her Rites, and Sarah Siskin is the woman that co-wrote with me. And this is one of my favorite songs. This one and the last song, The Legacy, Rite of Legacy, are my 2 favorite songs on the album. But there is something about this idea of knowing. And actually, Heather Stringer talks about it years ago. She talked about it on a podcast where she said the 3 words you should take out of your vocabulary if you're a female is "I don't know." And I love that, because truthfully, there's so many times we out ourselves. We say, "I don't know, but," and it's not true. If we slow down, our bodies do know. And the rite of intuition is that she knows.
Come on.
She knows what she knows. Now, she might not be in a safe enough place to say it. She might be smart enough to know that if she says it, it'll cost more than it's worth in the company that she's in. But the truth of it is she really does know. And why is she able or not able to actually speak that truth? And that's the journey of the rite of intuition, is knowing what you know and then speaking that knowing.
Oh, so good. Which then leads to rite of legacy. I think I feel very drawn to this one as well.
How are we going to die? Right. And what's so fun is that you were talking about birthday parties, and I thought birthday parties, I love birthday parties. I love to celebrate birthdays. I thought I'd write about that in the rite of birth, and it actually came out completely in the rite of legacy. So again, the rite of legacy is the last time your name is spoken on this earth. And, we're told that you die once when you're laid in the ground, but you die a second time when your name is last spoken. And so how will your legacy be told? And even, I was just talking about this in the idea of the blessing, the song, The Blessing, on 1,000 generations, your children and their children and their children. What are you living in such a way that your children and your children and your children will tell stories about how your body moved in this world and how your spirit moved in this world? And that to me is the essence of legacy. It's that sense of how did we live and how will we die? And I go back to that last breath. Like, our mothers were our story keepers in our first breath. And so we have to kind of piecemeal together that story from what we can gather. But we have full ownership to be able to plan as best we can for our last breath. Meaning, I tell a story of my friend's mom who had a funeral file, And she kept all the things that she wanted at the funeral, the type of food, who she wanted there, what she wanted to wear, all these things. And they decided on her 70th birthday, she was healthy, alive and well. She's still alive and well. She's an incredible woman. They decided to throw her funeral for her as a birthday party. And it was just such a beautiful moment of women taking ownership and power over death and saying, I'm not going to be afraid. I'm actually going to step into it, and I'm actually going to disciple you with the way that I'm going to die. And, you know, it's my pastor here who made us write out our funeral plans. And she says that it's our last birthday party. It's our last moment, and we can plan it if we actually aren't afraid of it. And I think there's so many things that I have been too afraid to look in the face and actually plan and take ownership and then disciple with. And I think our death is one of them. And therefore it makes you think about the legacy you leave, because it's after we're gone. Is we live with an eternal God, and I know eternal is in me, but I don't often think eternally. I think about getting to eternity maybe, but I don't think about producing things that have eternal like fruition to them. And this is that idea. The rite of legacy is, yeah, can you think in such a way that you're discipling way after you're long gone?
So good. I don't even know why it's making me cry, but it's just making me cry. I'm like, yeah, I want that. It's just so, so good. Do you think that there are people, I mean, so this is the book, guys. And not only that, but there are actual practices that she writes out where you actually get to fill in the blank, kind of like Mad Libs, but you're doing it like in a way better way, like where you get to actually answer in. And so each one has a practice to go with it and how to actually engage this in an embodied way. So she doesn't leave you hanging. Like there are really some, you learn about it. And then if you feel drawn to it, you get something to help you practice it. I do think the more you do these things, the more you become awakened and something creativity starts to live in you. And you won't need this. You'll actually have it. Like she said, you already know, your body already knows, the Holy Spirit that lives in you already knows what needs to happen. There's something that I'm feeling drawn to lately, or I did some story work with Dan, and it was a doozy because it's Dan. And then I was like, I need to mark what he's kind of brought to light. And he looked at me, and I felt this impulsivity. I was with him and Adam and Kathy, and I'm like, we need to do this right now. And Dan just looked at me and it'll make me cry thinking about it. And he just said, Karrie, you'll know when it's time, and it's not time. You'll know when it's time to mark this moment. And, you know, and bless him, he just was like, and I'll be there if you want me to be there. I'll be there to mark this with you. But we will do a disservice to what your spirit knows if you do it now. And he was so right. He was so, so right. And I know, I know that I know what I need to do and what it needs to look like to mark this moment where there was deep cursing, and how to break that cursing and what to do with that. And this cursing was from my mother. And so there's something that I think your body knows. There was something that Jesus was inviting us into, like, hey, when you eat my body and drink my blood, you're going to move into what it means to actually become an embodied human, and what it means to embody the Spirit of God, and that he's going to lead you. It's wild. He's going to lead you down these wild paths. But what I love about your book is when, for those of us that are novice going, well, how do we start? Like, where do we start? And you give a lot of the, hey,
right?
here,
Like every client, I could have imagination for days. I'd be like, just go home and do this and do this and do this. And the truth of it is it does a disservice. And sometimes we feel lost at, well, what is the step? And so what I try to do in the marking guides is I share what I wrote for my own marking ceremony. Then I put a little template there for you to fill out. And then I say, like, write your own, or just read it and think about it and come back to it. Right. And there's that sense of like, do you need to elope right now, or do you need to wait a year and plan the wedding? Like, you know, maybe you want to do both. That's right. Some people want to do both. Who knows? But there's that sense of what your body will know. And this is just a guide so you don't feel lost. Because I do also think that in my mind, I have all these ideas, And I don't ever want to put that pressure on someone. I also don't want to leave there when they're like, where do I go from here? Well, here's some ideas. Sit
Right.
with it and see what feels right, and then come back to
Yes.
it later, and then try your hand at it, and then wait and see if you want to do it on your own, you know?
Yes. And I think the more that we come to ourselves, there's been such marring against our imagination and desire. There, it's been so killed, especially in our innocence as children, through a really dark and evil world. And I think what you're inviting us into in this book is really into what it means to desire and imagine and allow, that some of that childhood play to come into partnership with killing what is been evil and what has been harmful with a sense of imagination, creativity, and play. It doesn't mean that there won't be sorrow to it, but there is an essence of power in play. And it is in the face of evil. Evil, there is no play, there is no delight. It is all demand, and it is all just oppression. And it is
Oh,
very hard to be oppressed when you're playing. It's really, really hard. I don't even know if you can. And what I feel is, I was like, man, there's just such an invitation here. And so, I encourage you all to understand that as you read, read it
yeah.
a chapter and sit with it. Even though I devoured it, I mean, literally devoured the book. And I don't say that very often. Most of you guys know I read a book about 3/4 of the way through and I'm like, all right, I get it. Like, I get what you're trying to say there. And there's very few books that I like devour. And this book, I'm like, it was a meal to my soul. And so if I can just tell you, if you are looking for a guide, a good sage guide to find your face, your body, your story in the midst of heartache, this is the book. This is the book. It is so well written, Christy, and it is. I mean, the illustrations are beautiful. The fact that there's going to be music to it, that it'll be out by the time you guys are listening to that. So go hear that and take it in. This is how I would explain it. When you've sat down and had a really good meal, don't do what I did and just, ingest it. I couldn't help myself, but savor it. And this book is to be savored. It is to be read over and over again. You will go back to moments of it. And I just want to thank you for writing something for so many of us that have not had good aunties and good mothers and good sisters and good friends, where it's not been one arrow, it's just been so many. That you're actually a woman who is not afraid to take our hands and walk with us slowly through a rite of passage of what it means to actually be loved well, and to not just need you to love us well, but to teach us how to love ourselves well in a way that actually honors our creator. It's one of the best books I've ever read. And I'm so thankful for you. I'm so thankful for how you've marked me. And in those waters, I know you very little, and yet I feel like I know you so well, but I've been marked by you in the most incredible ways. And this book is a gift. It is a gift. And I'm so thankful for it. Whether any of you want to read it or not, it's a gift to me. And I thank you for being I thank you for being a woman that was born and that was born again to hope and possibility through, and just the Jesus in you is intoxicatingly stunning. And so thank you for writing this. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for being a friend of women. Thank you for believing that there's more for us. Thank you for creating a tent. Thank you for willingness to wander in the desert and find all of us who have been battered and bruised. We are dusty and thirsty, and you are an oasis for many of our hearts. So I'm so thankful for you. I'm so thankful for you.
Repeated in my heart and my head as you were talking, just believe, hear her, because it is scary. It's scary to love so vulnerably and so feels really good to be seen. Really good. So thank you for blessing me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it comes so easy. I would say it for the next 30 minutes,
No,
but nobody wants
no.
to hear me gush on you for that long.
I kept your voice memo forever. Forever.
You may get some more. Christy, thank you for being on the podcast. If people want to find this book, they want to find you, they want the things that you have. By the way, Theology of the Womb, go get that as well. You do womaneering. There's so many things that you offer, retreats and whatnot. If they want to find you and if they want to get this book, how would they do that?
That's probably the easiest way. And I'm really not good at making myself findable. So I apologize, everyone. But there is the website, and every once in a while we update it. So that's all I can offer. Oh.
Yes. And if they want the book, can they get it on Amazon?
The book's on
or
everywhere.
Is it just through your
Freedom
website?
House put it out, and so it's findable. Probably the way you can help me most is going to a local bookstore actually and asking for it, because that's just cool and retro, and it's probably the best way to get me numbers, which is what they tell me I need. So that, yeah, I mean, geez.
Yes, I hear you.
So yeah, there's that. But yeah, ChristyBauman.com, and any major Amazon or any major place that you buy your books is the place to find it.
Great. I want to echo this in the sense of, if you guys are like having, I know you're going to run a rush out and get this on Amazon, and power to you, leave a review. It does make a really big difference. But if by chance you're by a Barnes and Noble and you can wait a week, or if it's not there already and you order it, it actually is really good for the author. I can say that as being a published author. It moves books, and it also moves publishers to see that there's a demand outside of Amazon. So if you want to do that and just be super cool and go do that, go to a bookstore and do that. Go to one of her retreats if you can. Get her book. Bless her. Let's get this out there. Do a study with a bunch of women. How fun would that be? This is better in community than it is alone. And I say that from being in community. So we're excited for where the book is going to go. This is an evergreen, my friend. It will continue to live on in the hearts of so many. I'm excited to be in the camp with you. I'd want it no other way. May God bless you and keep you, my friend, and may your words forever be a legacy to those that are hearing them. May they live far beyond you, and bless those. We'll see you guys next week.